our first keynote, I'd like to invite Dr. Ken Ware from Neurophysics Therapy Institute and Research Centre, Australia, to deliver the first keynote talk. Before his presentation, I'd like to introduce him as Dr. Ken Ware was the founder of Neurotrictional Sciences Private Limited and Neurophysics Therapy and Research, and he had been in private practice for almost 30 years while doing independent and collaborative research. He also presented unique research at 10 major international science conferences, including neuroscience, physics, psychology, and life sciences, which covers a very broad scientific audience. He is former Mr. Universe 1994 National Powerlifting and Bodybuilding Champion and record holder. He had published relative publications in Frontiers in Clinical Physiology, World Journal of Neuroscience, World Journal of Cardiovascular Diseases. He's recipient of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth's Australian Sports Medal in 2000 in recognition for personal contributions to the development of Australian sporting culture. Welcome, sir, Dr. Ken Ware for his keynote talk.
Well, which one are we speaking? Both? Yep, great. Well, I'd certainly, on behalf of the Scientific and Organising Committee, I would also like to welcome you to INBC 2019 and thank you for your participation in the conference as distinguished presenters and supporters. And it is indeed an honour to be opening the conference with my presentation this morning. A great way to start the conference off is to open our minds up is with a good light brain teaser. And nothing could be more fitting than the incredible case of Noah Wall. As a result of a cephalic disorder, Noah was born with an estimated 2% of his brain, the signature of a condition referred to as hydroencephaly. But despite this incredible cortical deficit, it's no exaggeration to say that Noah has functioned and responded relatively normal to his environment since birth. The other incredible feature of Noah's journey through life is that his brain actually regrew to 80% of normal size by age 3. Whereas it is commonly accepted that the number of neurons you are born with are pretty much all you'll ever have. So we would regard this as an unprecedented isolated case. We also have the honour of having Noah and his parents Shelley and Rob being with us today. They've made the trip over to the conference to meet everyone and to answer any questions you may have at the break. The family is certainly willing to explore any research opportunities if there's any interest in this from members of this conference. I became more and more fascinated with Noah when I first met him and his mum on Skype, and was stunned to learn that given that there was an incredible number of media releases and documentaries about Noah since his miraculous survival at birth, no one in the field had studied him since birth and closely monitored the regrowth of his brain. So tragically, we don't have any of these data for this presentation. I liken this a little bit like if we knew nothing about space travel but saw images of people walking on the moon and had no information as to how they got there. So we have to creatively hypothesize on the most logical rationale to explain this based upon the knowledge we do have. So if any one of us in the audience, in the gathering here today, we're in an audience of non-academics, we were asked, so how was Noah able to function and behave normally and emotionally express all that he was able to with only having 2% of a brain? What would one say in order to satisfy this audience? As we know, there is public expectation that as experts we should know. Not having answers to something as significant as this enables the public to make all sorts of ambiguous comments about how much neuroscience doesn't know about the brain in a derogatory fashion. So despite all the missing pieces, we need to be able to offer some type of response. I must, however, admit that I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone with this presentation, as infant brain development and pathologies is not my area of expertise. My area of expertise is in neurophysics phenomena, in particular the phenomena relating to the role chaos plays in the maintenance of our healthy systems, and my presentation tomorrow will be more towards this. But having worked with Noah and having knowledge of his history, I felt it was too good of an opportunity to share Noah's unique and unprecedented story at this meeting. This presentation is a summary of the contents of this handout version, so please feel free to collect one if you wish, so it's much more densely populated with a lot more information, of course. So in case you're wondering how I met the incredible Noah Wall and his remarkable family, it's always interesting how things go around, and it was actually through international media releases connected to the work that I presented last year at this conference which related to a victim of the Manchester bombing who had sustained a complete spinal cord injury from the blast and who made significant improvements to lost functions in 2 weeks from neurophysics therapy. Noah's mum Shelley sought me out for treatment for Noah after seeing a segment on this dedicated to this on Good Morning Britain. Noah's parents Shelley and Rob were given no hope that Noah would survive at birth and that they should prepare his funeral. However, the attending medical staff were shocked when Noah responded normally at birth, crying, sucking and displaying normal bodily movements. This is, however, not uncommon, as all babies initially respond from their brain stems at birth until their cortex settles and begins to make sense of the world. Hence, all babies are referred to as brainstem beings. However, within a few weeks, infants with hydroencephaly will begin to display symptoms. Generally, after several months post-birth, more traumatising signs and symptoms such as seizures may emerge, and the infant may develop hydrocephalus as this was not already present at birth. Intellectual deficits, impaired growth, paralysis, sensory motor impairments, poor thermoregulation, respiratory problems may also emerge over time. However, biology is messy and entropy is everywhere, and molecular driving forces produce nonlinear effects. There is notably a lot of variability in signs and symptoms from one of these cases to the next. Symptoms and quality of life seem to vary enormously, and that is, there's no linear effects relative to the degree of hydroencephaly between one infant and the next. The existing medical paradigm suggests that an infant born with only 2% of their brain would not survive long term without artificial intervention or without at least acute monitoring, care and support, and would be severely disabled physically and mentally during the supported lifespan of that individual. It is anticipated that there would be no normal further increases towards normal brain topology, and that at birth the infant basically has all the neurons it will ever have. Up until now, it's been a standard observation that severely diminished brain size at birth does not increase in topological percentage towards normal brain topology post-birth. Historically, these standard observations and prognosis have held up and are supported by such cases where children have been born with approximately 20% of their brains. Typically, in these cases, the topological percentage of normal brain topology did not alter, and as predicted, the heads of these children are notably small and they are significantly physically and mentally disabled and fully dependent. The existing paradigm also suggests that at least 80% of the full adult brain and corresponding neurocorrelates are required for the individual to become fully conscious. So here we are hypothesising the central nervous system's genius to trigger and self-organise to higher states of complexity, as epitomised in the case of Noah Wall, the boy born with only 2% of his brain. I will at least attempt to hypothesise on how these incredible events might have unfolded, and were enabled by referencing other natural phenomena observed in the natural world as metaphors, analogies or equivalences. This is not to suggest that this is what Noah's brain actually did. I'm simply identifying the likeliness to other natural occurring phenomena. You can see some images on the right there of Noah at various stages of his development, and there's a whole library of videos dedicated to Noah's journey from birth on YouTube. So the big questions remain. How or why was Noah able to respond normally from day one without a fully developed cortex and cerebellum? Even at age 3, the scans of Noah's brain exhibited a significantly underdeveloped occipital lobe, temporal lobe and cerebellum. Yet he was able to see, hear and display normal behavioural and motor responses and demonstrate normal emotional responses to emotionally arousing environmental stimuli, with what appeared to be a significant compromised thalamus and limbic system. The second obvious question is, what inspired Noah's brain to begin to regrow and to grow to where it is today, and why was this necessary if he was seemingly doing just as well without it? So in addressing how or why Noah could respond to the environment quite normally in advance of the emergence of and the development of regions of the brain deemed vital for normal functions and behaviours. From when I very first became aware of Noah and from conversations I was having with his mother Shelley, who had told me of all the things Noah was able to do within the first 12 months of his life against the odds, my immediate thoughts were, here's one of the greatest arguments for fractal phenomena in physiology, and yet challenges at the same time. It seemed to me that the only explanation here was that each neuron within the remaining 2% of Noah's brain at some fractal scale must have been able to exhibit all of the behaviours and do all of the jobs the brain has to do, and it was only through a series of phase transitions over time that neurons began to differentiate into specific and or combinational roles, and the brain progressively regrew towards 80%. Neurons that were present from birth somehow collaborated as a whole in such a high-dimensional and highly compensatory manner to extract information from the inner and outer environments, and as an example, display adaptive, emotionally appropriate and specific goal-orientated behaviours, such as gesturing for food and attention, the recognition of and pointing to objects of discrete interest and personal satisfaction, making decisions and choices, the recognition of faces, the mirroring of behaviours of others, paying attention, saying words and coordinated movements. Particular classes of neurons found in various regions of the brain have been identified as playing major roles in the individual's ability to facilitate all of these perceptions, actions and cognition. Yet these regions were not present in Noah's brain, needless to say, nor were the specific classes of neurons when he was able to exhibit all of the behaviours above by age 1. Excuse me. So attempting to express how a very small cluster of neurons can impersonate the whole brain, because somehow in Noah's severely compromised brain from birth, they did. Nature uses very simple rules to generate complex patterns. This is representative of scale-free phenomena, typified by a small section of something that performs and functions as the same as the whole. For example, a small piece of broccoli is structurally the same and serves the same functions as the whole broccoli. This is fractal geometry in nature showing similarity at every scale. Likewise, the blood vessels and capillary system of the lungs are similar to the root system of a tree, and they both serve the same function. They are both transport systems. Are these just sterile representations of how the remaining 2% of Noah's brain managed to impersonate and function as a whole brain? There seems to be no other logical explanation. In Noah's case, this is symbolic of a small cluster of neurons behaving as a fractal version of the brain as a whole. Microstructures and assemblies identified in very small systems can be similar to structures and assemblies identified in very large systems, not only geometrically but also in functionality. In essence, there is nothing special about being a human being as their systems are following the same rules and laws of nature that all living systems emerge and evolve from. Put simply, a very small part of any particular complex adaptive system can be a micro version of the system operating as a whole. We can also use flocks of birds flying in unison as a kind of metaphoric equivalent to demonstrate how the remaining 2% of Noah's brain at some fractal scale were able to exhibit all of the behaviours and do all of the jobs the brain has to do. This is central to expressing agents that normally have their own identity and individual behaviour transitioning into playing a role within a large, complex, high-dimensional dynamical system. Flocks of starlings flying in unison exhibit high levels of complex, interconnected fractal behaviours across all the agents in these systems. Every agent is similar in structure, function, and behaviour, and contributes equally to the overall nonlinear dynamical behaviours of the system. So simple rules enable complex behaviours to emerge, and the simple rules here are: each bird only communicates with its nearest neighbours. The flock communicates through an electrical field that is generated by the flock. It is goal-orientated to avoid a predator. It maintains a high signal-to-noise ratio to enable chaotic behaviours to emerge. That is, if the signal-to-noise ratio was 1:1, the flock's behaviour would be periodic and 100% predictable. The natural resting state of the brain is also chaotic and also has a high signal-to-noise ratio to maintain optimum health, spontaneity and adaptability. Problems emerge when the brain becomes less chaotic, more synchronised, with a low signal-to-noise ratio, and this is when seizures, for example, are likely to occur. The brain and flocks of birds flying in unison display deterministic chaos, defined as a system that is governed by some deterministic rules but behaves in an unpredictable, chaotic manner. From scale-free structure to scale-free functionality as a whole. In Noah's developing brain, it could have only been the collective wisdom of all the neurons that he did have, all working in unison, similar to our flocks of birds flying in unison, that enabled him to display normal behaviours and respond to environmental cues in a normal manner, heavily compensating for regions of the brain that were not there or very underdeveloped. Hence, there could not have been a lot of scope for differentiation and specialisation in the early phases of regrowth. With no privileged point of observation, excitatory and inhibitory processes would have needed to maintain a more unified seamless flow state to enable new behaviours to emerge. Panoramic phaptic coupling would enable such phenomena, whereas in the normal brain, inhibitory neurons need to inhibit some actions to enable other actions to occur and to maintain a curity of excitatory processes. In a dynamical, flowing, chaotic system like flocks of birds flying in unison, there is not inhibitory birds and excitatory birds, and the birds themselves are not voluntarily deciding which way to go to follow some leader. So each bird's neurons must also be in a spontaneous, seamless flow state, acting as a scaled-down version of their overall dynamical system. This is opposed to their normal states when they are acting as individuals, eating, digesting, sleeping, grooming, and reproducing. The fact is, you cannot see any behaviours in any one system that is not applicable to all other nonlinear dynamical systems. If phenomena is apparent in flocks of birds flying in unison, then it is a given that it is possible for other living systems under certain conditions to produce similar phenomena. So where was the abstract version of Noah's pre-lesion brain stored that the regrowth of his brain referred to for its guidance? So surely regrowth of the brain is not a self-activating process, or else it would be observed all of the time. If we look through the lens of DNA, we have to complement each and every remaining neuron present in Noah's brain at birth for all working together to orchestrate this unprecedented regrowth. However, there needed to be the right forms of environmental signals to inspire this process. For example, a pine cone decorating a coffee table has all the potential to become a magnificent pine tree in accordance to its encoded DNA, but will always remain a pine cone in this environment. When it is exposed to the right environmental stimuli and stresses such as soil, sun, heat and rain, the picture of the pine tree encoded in its DNA will begin to emerge. So what then were the contributing factors that inspired the unprecedented regrowth of Noah's brain towards normal size? Classic nature versus nurture debates will possibly go on forever. However, we simply have a relative problem to solve here that we would like to form some logical opinions on. We know that Noah's innate system has the recipe of a normal human being encoded within his DNA. But we know from many studies performed on severely abused and neglected children that normal physical and emotional growth can be severely inhibited. So if a rule is that a loving, supportive environment stimulates and contributes to normal growth and behaviour, then it is known that Noah was surrounded by lots of love, care and nurturing. We can draw from this that these are some of the factors that may have contributed to and supported the emergence of normal behaviours encoded in his DNA, even in the absence of large proportions of the brain, and as well inspired the abstract version of the whole brain to emerge from the existing seeds, which were the 2% of the brain Noah was born with. There are many intertwined innate factors to consider. However, the overarching scientific factor is, when given the right sets of initial conditions, complex adaptive systems will naturally self-organise towards higher states of complexity, and the human brain is certainly the most complex of all complex adaptive systems known to humankind. Innate survival mechanisms, survival of the species mechanisms, establish the primary sets of initial conditions and motors for all regrowth, restoration or repair in all living systems. Based upon this postulation, we need to then identify an equivalence in nature that is similar to the regrowth phenomena that took place in Noah's brain. However, for some kind of modelling to refer to metaphorically, we need to be able to first identify that similarities do exist in crossover in the natural world between phenomena observed in nature, in both the plant and animal worlds, based upon some of nature's simple rules. I've chosen here similarities there are between vegetation patterns found in different regions of the world and the patterns found on animals native to these regions, such as the leopard bush and tiger bush patterns, and then we have the leopard and the tiger. Based upon these, the vegetation patterns emerge from pruning back due to harsh environmental conditions. The system at large is in a strategic survival state. However, once the wet season comes and the environmental conditions improve, uniformity returns to these landscapes. Based on these observations, it is reasonable to suggest that if something can naturally occur in the plant kingdom in terms of spontaneous regrowth, restoration or repair, post the effects of severe environmental conditions, then there is also scope for similar phenomena to occur in the animal kingdom post severe lesion of the system. Further to this, there is also similarities to the underlying driving forces of rules that govern our flocks of birds flying in unison to those that govern the survival of all the individual bushes, contributing to the formation and stability of the vegetation patterns. Each bush only communicates with its nearest neighbours by what scientists have identified as sophisticated lateralised communication networks, involving root systems communicating to each other, similar to axons stimulating neighbouring neurons. The suggestion is that the neurons in Noah's underdeveloped brain were following similar, simple rules, which enable the small cluster of remaining neurons to perform as the whole brain for survival, and then the right sets of environmental conditions stimulated regrowth and increases in complexity. Natural order and self-organisation to higher states of complexity. Above, the images on the left portray railway land that had been previously extensively cleared and maintained for little more than a century. Now left to its own resources, the land is self-organising and regenerating. In a few decades' time, this land will begin to mirror its neighbouring landscapes. On the right is land that had been long-term single-crop farmed, and as a result the land was very poor in nutrient content. Initially only noxious weeds and grasses grew, but this established the sets of initial conditions to put nutrients back into the ground as they died off, which is now enabling this land to keep self-organising and increasing in complexity until it too will begin to mirror its neighbouring landscapes. And keeping in theme here, we now turn our attentions to images above of Noah's brain compared to the normal brain of an infant. It is reasonable to assume that Noah's brain from the onset aspired to normalise. Similar to the landscapes above, the right sets of initial conditions combined with stimulating, enriched environment enabled Noah's brain to self-organise to higher states of complexity. This is simply another example of natural order taking over. The question might be, why does this not commonly occur in other children born with only a small percentage of their brains? What was different about Noah's environment that established initial conditions for regrowth? We know Noah was nested in a highly supportive and loving environment, as mentioned earlier. However, this is required for the healthy mental and physical development of any child. We cannot say that other children with similar physical restraints are less loved and supported, and therefore they did not regrow or grow a normal brain post-birth. So in order to express this phenomenon of Noah's brain's regrowth, we may just have to settle on the simple overarching theme here, which is, when given the right sets of initial conditions, natural order enables lesion systems to self-organise to higher states of complexity and to be able to mirror previously states of complexity, and that is during environmentally fertile times, regardless of whatever that means to any particular system, living system. Natural order enables the system to self-organise to reach its optimum evolutionary potential. The neuron is a complex adaptive system, as is the brain as a whole. Some of the intrinsic features of complex adaptive systems are interconnectedness and their ability to adapt to changes within the environment and/or to new information entering the system by some means or process. Interconnectedness simply implies that all agents within the system are intimately connected in some way or by some common mechanism. The stock exchange and social media are some examples of large global networks that are themselves complex adaptive systems. Whereas in biology, the living system as a whole is a complex adaptive system. The immune system, as for example, is a subsystem of this macro system and is also regarded as a complex adaptive system playing a major role in maintaining stability of the organism and adapting to changes within the organism's environment. This enables the system to remain stable as it holistically adapts to constant changes within the environment. However, you cannot just look at one small part of the system and know how the system is behaving as a whole. This is a very important point to behold. Likewise, you cannot understand the neuron in isolation to the organism it inhabits, and you cannot understand the organism in isolation to the environment it inhabits. Noah's brain, being a complex adaptive system comprising of much less than an optimal number of agents at birth, was not only capable of adapting to changes within the environment, Noah's brain was also able to increase in complexity and regrow from these minimalistic sets of initial conditions. There always needs to be balanced positive and negative feedback loops that inspire and propagate organisational growth, opposed to rogue growth patterns where there is too much positive feedback which will self-destruct the system. So now we need to refer to some form of computational equivalence that simulates incredible adaptability and regrowth trajectories of Noah's brain. Factoring in and supporting the complementaries and complexities above, I've chosen a cellular automata modelling to metaphorically express these phenomena. Cellular automata shows us that from very simple rules, algorithms, chaos can emerge and highly complex patterns can emerge over time from chaos. The simple rule of Rule 30 classically displays this phenomena. On the left, the simple rule of Rule 30 and the typical deterministic structure it was anticipated it would produce. However, when computer science, mathematics and theoretical guru Stephen Wolfram decided to keep the program running one day, he saw chaos emerge on the bottom right. Nature uses very simple rules to generate complexity in nature. Wolfram then experimented more and more with his cellular automata, and when he got to simple rule 110, he noticed that the patterns we see in nature, such as the shapes of leaves and the patterns of shells, begin to emerge. However, he was condemned by his peers when he made the comment that nature uses simple rules to generate complexity based upon his findings with his cellular automata models. He replied, "I'm not saying this is what nature does, I'm simply demonstrating that you do not need complex rules to generate complex behaviours." The inference here being that from some simple state, Noah's brain must have used a simple rule to generate complex behaviours and increase in complexity and dimension. So in identifying cellular automata models that are more closely related to the nation using cellular automata 08, in processing language to simulate urban biological growth behaviour based on a terrain map of water boundaries and contours as the rules. Below right, the similarities there are to cellular automata models to actual urban growth, seen here in the Las Vegas urban growth satellite time-lapse. In summing up, not having the benefit of being able to retrospectively look over time-lapse images that portray the regrowth of Noah's brain over the first 3 years of his life and up until the present day, we can only refer to simulations based upon credible science that firstly demonstrate that all systems are governed by similar rules and are subject to the same laws of nature. And therefore, if phenomena occurs or is observed in large or small complex adaptive living systems, then there is a high probability that when studying and trying to understand the behaviour of any large or small complex adaptive systems phenomena that has quite large unknown qualities and quantities, you can then refer to previously observed phenomena where there are some basic similarities to assist in answering problems you're having with the understanding of the nature of the phenomena you are studying. A relative problem here is, how did Noah's brain evolve from birth to age 3 and beyond? In attempting to make accurate predictions for urban growth, there are far too many variable influences that could amount to surmountable errors in your predictions emerging over time from the initial conditions you projected from. In the case of the regrowth of Noah's brain, there are also many variables that could have influenced the growth trajectory and rate that regrowth took place. We can assume that being nested within a loving, supportive and stimulating environment would have had a highly positive influence on normalisation and regrowth. However, many children born with similar pathologies do not prosper so as well, and their brains do not regrow post-birth. With Noah comes evidence of possibilities thought to be impossible, and this should arouse a curiosity to explore and delve more and more into the mechanics of such possibilities, and most importantly discover what we have been overlooking, missing and not considering. I very much thank you for your attendance and your attention this morning for my presentation. And I do believe there's a bit of time left now for some questions and any comments that anybody likes to make. But in the meantime, I would certainly like to invite Noah and his parents, Shelley and Rob, to be up here because there may be some questions that you'd like to ask them as well.